Hi, folks. We will be starting shortly. Stay tuned. Thank you. Okay, I think we should start. Good morning, everybody. My name is Manny Yap, and I lead the sales and marketing at Netwoven. We are here today for the Microsoft Office 365 Governance and Adoption webinar. Thank you for joining us today. Before we get started, I wanted to share with you some housekeeping items. The webinar is being recorded today. We will be making the link available later to you. We will also be watching the question box since everyone is muted right now. So if you take a look at the right, there's a question box sample there. If you have any questions during the presentation, please input it here and we will be answering them as best as possible. If there are any follow-up questions, please feel free to contact us at info@netwoven.com. Let me introduce you to Netwoven. We are a Microsoft Gold certified cloud solutions partner founded by former Microsoft executives. We have been in business now for over 15 years with nearly 150 people spanning across these offices. Some of our notable customers are listed below. We offer many services from content and collaboration, data and AI, business applications, and infrastructure management. We provide value to customers by providing cost-effective services, which include consulting, products, and staffing. If you want to hear more about these services, please don't hesitate to let us know. Today, we are focused on content and collaboration. We work with these Microsoft technologies, including SharePoint, Yammer, Teams, OneDrive, Flow, and Power Apps. Our services span many areas, including migrations, e-discovery, and security and compliance. We deliver these services through a few days of workshops, jumpstart programs, to a complete implementation solution scenario. Before we get started today, I'd like to ask you to answer a poll for us. What motivated you to join the webinar today? Please answer the poll in front of your screen and we will close it momentarily. Okay, so it looks like 31% planning to deploy, 30% in the middle of deploying, and 35% have already deployed. Great, thank you. Now, let me introduce to you our presenter. Andrew Sutton, or we call him Drew, is our practice director at Netwoven. He has been with Netwoven now for over 10 years and has been a successful leader for both onshore and offshore projects. He is well-versed in organizational portals, enterprise information architecture, extranets, records management, to name a few. He has been an integral contributor to the success of many of our customers. Without further ado, please welcome Drew Sutton. Drew?
Hey, thanks, Manny. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Appreciate you making the time to join us today. I'm going to go ahead and dive right in so that we can focus our effort on the content. As far as our agenda for today, I'm going to quickly do an introduction to the topic. We'll talk a little bit about governance and its impact, and then we're going to dive into the meat of the presentation today, which is the focus areas. Content lifecycle management, adoption, monitoring, insights, and action. And then at the end, we're going to try and leave a few minutes so we can do some Q&A and talk about what is next. So just quickly today, I want to make sure that everybody knows this is not going to be a fluffy conversation about Office 365, what it is, and why organizations are purchasing it. We're assuming that the audience here is well beyond this, and we're planning on diving into some of the details of why governance and adoption are important, as well as where you can make some most valuable investments to ensure that you're getting the most out of your investment in Office 365. So let's start with governance and its impact. I think governance is a fairly expansive topic, but when it comes down to what we're looking for in an ideal governance, implementation, is a careful balance between a frictionless experience and the ability to maintain control. We want to make sure that we empower our users to use the environment and that they're able to do so without having to wait on IT, without having to wait on other users, and with the ability to actually use the controls to make themselves more productive. But at the same time, as an IT organization, we need to make sure that as we open these tools and workloads up, that we're managing any risk that that comes along and is related with using the system, as well as making sure that we have the ability to take insights and actions on what is actually happening in the environment. Now, many times we engage with customers, and there's some fairly common manifestations that we see where governance is lacking in an environment. And typically, those manifestations fall into these 4 buckets: frustrated users, whether that's non-intuitive processes, having to wait for manual intervention, or lack of education. There's a number of things that contribute to this. We also see many times in environments that we go into that security and permissions are not set correctly, and that organizations are unnecessarily exposing data internally and externally based on some of the lack of policies being in place. We also see many instances where there's excessive manual IT intervention required. Many times there's a lot of value to be derived from making sure that we automate processes where we can and reduce the overhead that comes along with that excessive manual intervention. And then I think one of the last and most important things we see is that there's a serious proliferation and sprawl of content and containers in many Office 365 environments. And it's great to allow our users to test the waters, but we do need to make sure that we clean up afterwards so that we maintain a healthy environment and you keep that increased productivity available to our users. So just quickly, obviously there's a cost to making sure that, or to overlooking the importance of governance. Whether that's the decreased productivity potential that we were talking about through waiting or not being able to find information, or whether that comes down to us as an IT organization. This is obviously not the only initiative we need to push forwards, and if we lose credibility in one place, that has an impact on our ability to be effective in others. We talked about the staffing overhead cost. Manual processes come with a cost, and many times there's a great ROI on making sure that we automate to reduce that overhead. There's definitely a significant exposure risk when it comes to data and compliance, and also we're making a serious investment in Office 365 as an organization. Making sure that it is adopted ubiquitously across the organization is something that brings value. And if we're not garnering that adoption, we're spending for less value than we should be getting. So I'll start with just a couple of quick examples here. I think many of us have seen these IDC studies that are produced, but if we look at something like an average $100,000 salary for an information worker, and even a fairly insignificant couple of hours of wasted time from a productivity perspective, that we're talking over $5,000 per year of sunk costs in that wasted time. And with organizations ranging in the thousands to hundreds of thousands of employees, we very quickly get into the multi-million-dollar range for this kind of lost productivity and the cost to the organization. And then just one other quick example, I think compliance policies obviously come with penalties if they're not followed. I think GDPR is something that's top of mind for many of us with the enactment of enforcement coming into play mid this year. And even just looking at that, there's a penalty which is the maximum of 20 million euros or 4% of the total annual revenue for a company. That is a ridiculously huge penalty that could come into play. So obviously making sure that we're in compliance is extremely important. And just one other quick example, 21 CFR Part 11 for medical device companies. Not only is there a multi-million-dollar disgorgement penalty, but there's also labor-intensive, multi-year bounce-back process to get back in accordance. So this is just a couple of many different examples, but there's obviously a serious financial impact to maintaining compliance or being out of compliance. So just quick summary of value proposition. We want to make sure that we maximize productivity efficiency potential for our organizations and employees. We want to make sure that we can reduce any support overhead and shadow IT costs that are not necessary. We want to avoid those regulatory compliance penalties. And then obviously as a business, we operate on our intellectual property and sensitive data, and making sure that we can limit exposure to that through an appropriate governance policy is extremely important to us thriving as a business. So before we jump into the three main areas, just quickly to talk about the governance landscape. I think many of us familiar with Microsoft and SharePoint content collaboration are familiar with the three main areas. IT governance, information management, and application management, which Microsoft has been publishing for many years. These are obviously each in their own right very important. In IT governance, we need to make sure that we have the appropriate sharing policies to safeguard our data. We need to make sure that we enable workloads at a reasonable pace and just support them with the right SLA in order to make sure that our users are able to adopt and use the different tools we're offering to them. In information management, many of us are familiar with taxonomy, content types, site columns, making sure that we're able to leverage that information and manage the life cycle of the information so that users can actually find content well. And then I think the last piece of the Venn diagram here is the application management circle. And obviously we have the opportunity as organizations to employ custom solutions. We can also employ third-party solutions from app stores. And we need to make sure that we have appropriate governance over these so that we can support our environment, and again, that we're safeguarding our data. We as a company, although we understand the importance of these main three areas, where we're really seeing the most traction and value is the center of the Venn diagram. And it's where we can take action that applies across all three of these. So that brings us to the three main topic areas for today, which are content lifecycle management, adoption, and monitoring insights and action. So moving forwards, we're going to go ahead and dive into each of these three different areas. So we'll go ahead and start with content lifecycle management. Just a little bit of context here. I'm not just talking about content lifecycle management at a content or document level. I think what we're seeing with our customers is that, especially with the advent of these new Office 365 groups and other workloads, that we're seeing now that the impact of sprawl is much more evident and impactful than it was in the past, because we're not just creating SharePoint sites. We're now also, with the creation of these containers, adding things to our global address list. We're populating directories that users have to search through to find what they're looking for. And obviously, we're increasing the corpus of data which is inside our search indices. And we need to make sure that we're cognizant and having certain policies in place to limit the negative impact of this potential sprawl. So as far as our most valuable investments that we're going to dive into in the content lifecycle area, we're going to talk a little bit about streamlining provisioning without giving up control. We're going to talk about understanding your content inventory. And then lastly, we'll talk about automating disposition rules. So quickly, before we dive into the provisioning piece, I think Manny has a quick poll that we're going to shoot out.
A poll is open, so please vote.
And I guess while that's open, I'll go ahead and just get started on the next slide here. So from a provisioning point of view, there's a number of key areas where we're seeing the organizations that we're working with, taking advantage or looking to take advantage to increase their capabilities here. So when it comes to provisioning, it's extremely important for us to make sure that we gather and validate metadata related to the actual provisioning requests. This allows us down the line to apply tailored policies and make sure that we actually understand we have a good solid inventory or directory of what's being created. Also in provisioning, the ability to auto-inject policies at the time of creation is really the crux of when things need to happen. So whether that's branding, whether it's things related to information management or content lifecycle, or any number of other things, the time of creation is the time it makes sense to actually inject these policies into the containers that you're creating. Now also in provisioning, in many cases, there's some sort of business process or user intervention required. So whether it's approval, training, feedback, or anything otherwise, it's again important for us to be able to have some sort of process that we can inject in here, so it's not just an immediate flow through. And then lastly, talking again about the fact that we have all of these different containers, it's not always easy for our users to understand exactly what the right container is for their particular provisioning or for their content collaboration need. So it's really important that we have the ability to inject help into the provisioning process itself. So just quickly, there's a number of different ways that we can apply this. So we see many customers using manual provisioning processes. They use their support desks where they can actually gather that provisioning metadata. And then those will be routed to a team where they can kind of manually inject policies, manually apply branding, create the sites, do whatever process orchestration is needed, and potentially even go back and forth at helping with the users. We also have other customers that have done custom implementation with patterns and practices or site designs, and this is a much better option. But both of these options have their drawbacks. There's obviously a lot of friction in the manual provisioning process, and in the custom implementation, there could be a fair amount of overhead with maintaining the process and making upgrades with the many updates that are coming into Office 365. So today, I was going to show a quick demonstration. Netwoven actually has a tool, our Office 365 governance application. I'm going to quickly show the provisioning form there just to give an idea so that everybody can understand what we're talking about here. So from a provisioning point of view in the tool here, users have the ability to submit a request. I'm showing the screen here, which starts the wizard. And this is a fully customizable tool. So this wizard is right now just showing an implementation that we have in place. But effectively, we're able to show on the side here links to help. So if folks want to go to the help center, or if they need some help choosing which workload to use, we have the ability to show that here, even which tool to use when. And then in here, there's a number of seeded templates so that we can support all of the different types of SharePoint and Office 365 containers that are available. And then once you actually select the container you want, we have the ability to gather information from users and do certain validations, support many different types of fields that are available here in order to meet the needs of gathering the data your organization needs. And then the request can be submitted and it will actually automatically be provisioned. Just a quick example there of how that can look. But in the end, extremely important for us to make sure that we're gathering this information so that we can consistently apply policies and make sure that the provisioning process is frictionless, but still maintains the control that we need. So next section is talking about content inventory. I think Manny has a quick poll again. We'll go ahead and kick out before I get started.
Go ahead and quickly answer. I'm going to close the poll now.
All right. So from an inventory point of view, I think, again, many of us are quite well aware that there's not a great interface out of the box for us to understand and view our inventory. Now that we've got groups and Yammer Connected groups and teams and SharePoint, again, we don't really have a consistent place to look at all of that. So being able to make sure that we can have a unified view so we can tease insights out of it is something important to us. And also, I think many of us are aware as administrators that there's certain data that's not always correct. And many times when we're pulling the site or site collection level information, for example, like a last modified date, which is very important to us from an inventory point of view, that those dates can be quite easily skewed by programmatic updates or scripts being run. So making sure that we're able to actually pull correct data to allow us, again, to tease out those insights is really important. And obviously, when we want to tease the insights out, the best way to do that is for us to actually have a visualization that lends itself well to our needs. So again, how to apply. So we have a number of different options here. For those of us proficient with PowerShell and custom coding, there are APIs available to extract the inventory data. We know that we get Power BI with Office 365, has some great capabilities there for data visualization and creation. Again, today I was just going to show quickly from our application, since this is something we've been catering to our customers' needs with. I'll do a quick demonstration of what we have available here, just to give an idea. So in the tool, we actually have the ability to automatically run inventory reports for a number of different types of content. And this content will actually be written into your environment. And then once we have the content created, we have the ability to use certain Power BI reports to actually visualize and work with that data. So our team has put together a first level embedded report. This is something that we're going to be constantly iterating on. We're open to feedback from our customers, and we'll continue to iterate and include in the product and for our customers that have deployed it. But you can see here, we've got quite a bit of information. There's information here about site collections and sites. We have information with last modified dates. So we're able to slice and dice. I can go ahead and I can actually drill in, particularly here, we have a lot that was just updated recently. So if I drill down into this, we can get a little bit more information. For other organizations with a larger data set than just this test bed, potentially the top level would be perfectly fine. So we also have in here some other reports. So groups, teams, Yammer. I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but effectively the idea is we gather the data. You want to have this useful information, like last modified dates, the type of container that it is, potentially who the owners are. There's a lot of information that's useful here so that as an administrator, you can tease through your environment and start to notice certain patterns or trends that would allow you down the line to maybe create some policies that can help automate dealing with some of the inventory, rather than you having to do a manual monthly effort of creating reports and sending them out to site owners and kind of manually dealing with deletion. I know a lot of our customers deal with that right now, and it's a fairly big burden on the administration team. Okay, we'll jump back to the deck here. So that's just a little bit of an idea on content inventory, and again, how that applies to the overall health of the environment. So the next section we have is content disposition. I think Manny has a quick poll again that we'll shoot out. And while the poll's out, I'll just go ahead and get started as well while you guys are answering. So when it comes to the content and the containers that we're creating, it's really important for us to be able to keep this environment fresh. And in order to do that, it's not very easy to do that manually. I mean, if we're administering an environment that's got tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of users, there's a lot of creation that's happening. And you're trying to have a couple of people keep up with that would be a bit ludicrous. So being able to make sure that we can apply adequate policies and also across all container types is extremely important. And I think there's two big things that come into these policies. One is triggering the policy, and the other is actually executing the actions that make up the policy. Now, we want to make sure that we can be intelligent on both ends here, because we don't want to over-trigger ignorant processes that require end users and content owners to be bugged too much. And at the same time, we want to make sure that we have the flexibility when it comes to employing actions that help us with disposition of content, that they're smart enough to meet our needs. So as far as application, I think many of us are familiar with information management policies. They've been with us for a long time in SharePoint. They're also available in SharePoint Online in a limited fashion. Many of us may also be familiar with a preview feature, which was released a few months back called Azure Group Expiration. I'll actually show both of these in a quick demonstration and talk a little bit about the pros and cons. We also have a number of customers that we're working with that do their own custom disposition implementations. And these work great. Again, with any custom implementation, there's a fair amount of overhead that comes with that, but also a good option. And then I'll show at the end of the demonstration also in our tool, again, just to give everybody an example of what can be done here, that we have a smart disposition rules engine that allows you to kind of take the best of both worlds here. So let's start out taking a quick look at information management policies. So in SharePoint, we have the ability to go into any SharePoint site or site collection, and we can create these site closure and deletion policies. So there's some pretty cool things we can do here. We can trigger the close event. We can trigger the delete event. The only thing that's, I guess, not as smart as we would potentially like it to be is that the only trigger we have is based on a created or closed date. I think you could probably see that that is not necessarily the most indicative factor of when we should be triggering a process, and it requires us to reach out to our end users maybe more times than we would really like to. But at the same time, there's some cool things here. We've got notifications in advance. We actually have the ability for allowing the content owners to postpone the deletion. So there are some capabilities here, but if we're looking at limitation in our ability to trigger just on the created date, and our only options are closing and deleting, we are a little bit kind of confined in what's here. And like I said, also, this only applies to SharePoint. So that's the first option. The other tool that we have available to us here is with the group expiration. So this is a preview feature available in your Azure portal. And in here, again, fairly limited. We only have the ability to indicate a lifetime. And after that lifetime is reached, there's some notifications that go out, and group owners receive those, and they're allowed to renew them. Which, again, it's a bit limited, it's a bit confined, but it does have a process that at least manages notifications. We may just be overly communicative with our owners and a little bit confined in what we can do with the actual disposition activities itself. So what I'd like to show quickly next is in the application here that we actually have a disposition rule engine. So what we can do here, we can select one or more containers that are available for us to apply a rule to. And when we get into the triggers here, we have a number of different feature or fields that we can work with. So our team is constantly adding to these. Right now, we're just showing some of the basic content inventory fields related to the container type. So here, a last modified date would probably be a lot more relevant in triggering a process than a created date. We have the ability to use different operators to refine the search. And effectively what we could do is use something like we did in SharePoint in the past, where we'd say today minus X number of days to trigger a policy. And we can add any number of criteria in here. And something that the team's working on right now is actually including also in here the provisioning metadata that we capture in the provisioning form, so that not only can we tailor our policies based on updated inventory data, but we can also tailor those policies based on the information that we gather about the container that was provisioned in the first place. So we have some good capabilities here for triggering. And then on the action side, we have a little bit more flexibility here. So we're not just talking about deleting or closing, making read only. We actually have, I'll talk about one extensibility option here, which is probably the most powerful. When we create this rule, when this runs and executes, the rule actually has the ability to save its content into a SharePoint document library. And I think for most of us, that probably creates the thought that, hey, I know I can use Flow or Power Apps or SharePoint Designer, sorry, not Power Apps, SharePoint Designer and Nintex in order to trigger and automate a process that would be a lot more flexible than just closing or deleting a site. So this is our entry point into something that is much more powerful from an action point of view. And our team's going to be building out a basic template that comes embedded with the tool for a disposition process. But in the end, I think coming back here, that taking advantage of some of these tools that we have at our disposal, and making sure that we're able to, again, use some automation, use some intelligence so that we don't have to do this manually is extremely important to keeping our environment fresh and healthy. Okay. So that completes our first section with the content lifecycle. And next, we're going to dive into adoption. So I think many of us are aware here that Microsoft has made some big strides in the right direction when it comes to ease of use. With the modern design canvas, we've got much easier sharing, we've got much easier editing of pages, working with lists and libraries. We've got that automatic mobile support for our web pages. So there's some great stuff that came into play, but I'm not going to kid myself that when it comes down to engagements and we're talking with organizations about getting their users ready to use the system, that this expansion of workloads isn't an easy hurdle to get over. I mean, if you add to that the pace and the cadence of change in Office 365, we're really in a position right now where our users need us as much as they ever have to help them keep on track. I think the big difference is that rather than before where we actually had to edit pages for them so they looked good, or we had to customize all sorts of different things, the point is now that there's a lot more feature set there, which is kind of readily available and actually usable by our end users. We just need to help make sure that we keep them on track by educating them with how they can use these workloads and where they should be used. As far as the most valuable investments that we're seeing as an organization in this adoption space is making sure that as an IT organization, we're elevating ourselves, we're elevating our resources, rather than just being reactive, to being a more proactive collaboration consulting team. Also, we're seeing that the creation of a persistent help center and a community around that is something that's extremely important rather than just focusing on reactive support cases. And then lastly, like I was talking about just before, it's extremely important that we help our users understand which workload to use and when. If there was any one topic from an adoption point of view that would kind of rise as the most important, I would have to say that this is it. So when we're talking about collaboration consulting, I think many of us realize that we had teams in the past when we had SharePoint on-prem. We were focusing on doing server patching and customizations and monitoring the diagnostic logs and that sort of stuff. A lot of that information, or a lot of those activities now, are less important in Office 365. And what we can do is we can elevate the focus of our team in order to focus less on those activities and more on providing real business value by assisting the end users to understand how they should use the functionality, and help them change their business processes in order to be more effective. So we consult up front, whether that's brown bag sessions, webinars, helping make sure that the information is out there, and helping people from the start when they're looking at provisioning. And being proactive, like I was saying, we don't want to just sit on our laurels and wait for support requests to come through. We want to be a proactive change agent in the organization and make sure that we're helping people do things in a way that is more productive than maybe the way that they've done things in the past. And I think in this case, I mean, there's no magic arrow here. It's more about making sure that you bring the right people in and provide the right training to your team to be effective in this role. And a lot of the team members we have, they have the background, they have the technical chops. They may just need a little bit of help to do that conversion. So this is something we've actually done a lot of work with our customers to help make sure that we allow that change, that evolution in the team. So the next topic that we have here is about a help center. So many of us as an organization, when we invest in Office 365, we're making investments in tools like Learn It or Brainstorm. The thing is, though, that there's a fairly sizable investment that goes into those things, and they're not necessarily intended to be around forever. So the idea is that we create a persistent help center, something that we own ourselves in our organizations, and we actually, we can link out to some of these other things like Brainstorm, but that we have that persistent center where people can continue to go over time. There's also an extremely important element about fostering a community. So, us being typically a smaller content and collaboration team in an organization, it doesn't always make sense for us to do the repetitive reactive support and just taking support issues all the time. We want to make sure that we can engage and interact with the community. And we're seeing a lot of great turnaround at organizations we're working with people getting excited about the features that we're enabling for them and being a part of the community and sharing what's working well for them as well as what's not. And then what we're able to do as the service owners is to make sure that we're curating content. So we can bubble up these important posts, share ideas that people are putting into the community, and then making sure that we're keeping on top of the many new feature releases that Microsoft sends out to us regularly, what's going on with the roadmap, and ways that we can help our organization make use of the tools. So as far as applying this, when we look at the different containers that are available in Office 365, a Yammer Connected Office 365 group is a really great place to start. And again, we have a help center template, which is something that we've worked on with a number of organizations, and is something that we'll also be including with the governance application, which I thought I'd just show quickly here to give an idea. So with the help center here, this is actually built on a classic page. We're in the process of updating this to use the modern design canvas. But there's a number of things we have here. So there's some links here to some of the Microsoft tools that are available. When it comes down to it, with the cadence of change, it doesn't necessarily make sense for us in each organization to be rebuilding help content for every topic, that it makes sense for us to link out. And then we can also add things here. If you have your temporary subscription to Brainstorm or Learn It or whatever it is, you can add those in here. We have our conversation here. So this is the Yammer Connected component. So we have conversations from folks in the community, and we can actually share as moderators of this community useful information to our organization. And then one of the other things that we found was quite useful was we've actually deep linked some content from some of the many different Microsoft kind of training locations on the web, so that we can do a direct search here. So just say I was interested in Yammer. I'm able to actually execute that search, and it can go through that curated content. And we've got some nice kind of hover panels in here, so you can actually see that content directly within context of the page. But if for any reason that curated content doesn't include all of the answers we need, there's a couple of things we can do. One, we can actually search in the conversations in Yammer, or we can also extend our search to the entire Office 365 Help Center. And what we've done in this case is that we've actually included not only the content that we've curated, but we've also included some top results from locations on the web. So there's some kind of key areas, some key sites from Microsoft, some key third-party sites where we can expand that search, as well as what we've curated. So there's a few different options here that are afforded to our users to make sure that they can really find the content they need themselves without always having to log a support request, whether that's through curated content, conversations, or just announcements about what's new. Okay. And then the last piece in the adoption section is talking about which workload to use and when. So I've seen a number of different ways to represent this. Some have worked a lot better than others, but I think one of the key things that I've noticed is that this, again, it's not a one-shot deal. That this is something that requires iteration, and it's something that requires a number of different perspectives to support. So whether we're starting talking about connected services in Office 365, or whether we're talking about the audience urgency chart, or whether we're working through a number of different other components and assets that can help show this, it's important to reemphasize and use multiple perspectives. And so when we do this, like I said, there's a couple of elements to each of these, but making sure we create polished and concise deliverables is important. And then also making sure that we inject this in the right place, whether that's the provisioning process or the help center. We need to give people this content to arm them with the right information at the right time, or it's not all that helpful. So just quickly on the next slide here, I have a couple of different infographics that we've created and that we've kind of altered from other things that we've seen, and some from Microsoft. But at the top, we have this kind of Office 365 connected services, helps folks understand the fact that, hey, there's a lot of different pieces, but they're connected together. I think many of us have seen this audience and time sensitivity infographic that was put together at one of the SharePoint events a year or two ago. So this is something that constantly evolves, but is a good tool to help folks understand in this general context which tools fall in the area that they're looking to meet a need for. We also have, we've built some content ourselves here talking about different use cases. So when we're looking at the modern tools, most of the time folks are looking at either, working with distributing content, engaging and interacting with a wide audience, or collaborating with the team. And then I think some of us are aware that we've got these new SharePoint hub sites coming, which help us really aggregate content across many of these different areas. And then, when folks are working in a personal space, they have OneDrive for Business. And the other one here, just quickly, we have this Office 365 groups, the inner loop, outer loop definition that Microsoft has put together. And that's something that's definitely been useful for users to understand the difference between those different types of groups. And then lastly, another way of looking at this in the top right was something that our team put together, which helps map a content lifecycle to the workloads that you would use in Office 365. So, from, kind of ideation and inception and research using OneNote, OneDrive, through to collaborating with a team, through to creating, some content that should be disseminated more authoritatively, to allowing people to actually find and surface that content and delve in SharePoint search. This is something that can speak to that. So in the end, these are just some examples, but it's extremely important to make sure that we reinforce the message. We use a number of different, perspectives to look at this from, and that we emphasize providing this information at the right time. Okay. So the last main section we have for today is monitoring insights and actions. Just some quick context here. It's extremely important to make sure that we can automate keeping a healthy environment. And so that's something we've talked about a few times already, which kind of plays into us gathering these insights and taking action on them. And then the other piece which we find very important here is that over the course of time, I've worked with many organizations, and one thing that comes up fairly consistently is that it takes a lot of effort to create quality content. And when we have a number of content owners that are spending that time to create that quality content, they really need some good feedback on which content is being used and how effectively it's being used. And if we're able to provide that feedback, we can really increase the productivity and the value that those content producers provide to the organization. And similarly, from an administrative point of view, understanding how the policies that we put in place are actually being complied to, as well as protecting our information or our intellectual property. And again, as an administrator, even understanding how Office 365 is being used, all of these feed into the value that we can provide back to our organization. So as far as the most valuable investments here, I think we've already done a fairly good coverage of the automated disposition rules and processes. We're going to focus a little bit on content usage metrics, and then the security and compliance policies play into this strongly as well. I don't think we're going to have time to get into all of this today, but that's definitely one of the topics for our next governance webinars coming up. So quickly, before I dive into content usage metrics, I think, Manny, we had one more quick poll here. And I guess while Manny's issuing the poll in the interest of time, I'll just keep moving forwards. So some of the kind of key investment areas inside content usage metrics. So out of the box, we have our site usage analytics. So this is something that's fairly new to SharePoint. It's also something, although there's a bit of value there, I think there's a fair amount of area for improvement or addition. So there's some good information I'll show in a quick demo in a minute about site usage analytics. There's also, when we're talking about the specific content, like documents, files that are being created, there's some information that's available that's gathered in Office 365, which is related to actual views of that content. And this property is actually exposed through Search and Delve right now. And I believe there's an update which is coming to SharePoint document libraries and OneDrive for Business, where we're going to have some new hover cards, and those are going to include information about views as well. We'll do a quick show of that in a minute. And then in the new modern pages, we also have a highlighted content web part. So, although it doesn't necessarily show the views, the view counts, that it does actually help bubble up information which is relevant so that when users come to the page, we can serve them that most valuable content. So again, from a how to apply perspective, I'll quickly show the site usage reports in SharePoint. The content analytics in Delve we'll take a quick look at. We're not going to take a look at the highlighted content web part just in an interest of time, but that's one of the new parts that's available on our modern design canvas, the new pages. So let's jump quickly over to usage. So if I jump into site usage, this is the new site usage page. Again, there is some useful information in here, talks about site visits in the last 7 days. We can see here trending content, and the kind of comparative viewing that it's getting from users. We see how much has been created. We also have the ability to look at shared externally. Don't have any of that here. But again, like I said, I'm not kidding myself here that seeing only 7 days of site visits and views comparatively, but not being able to see a count is a little bit limiting here. So, one of the things that we've worked with some of our customers on is providing some extensions in this area, which we'll talk about in a minute. And then on the Delve side of the house here, we can see here that through these cards, we're actually able to pull through the Graph API the number of views that each piece of content has. So although the experience is a little bit disconnected right now, we do have this same capability coming into OneDrive for Business and document libraries soon. And if you're looking at building any custom visualizations, again, this is a piece of data that we have access to that really helps empower our content owners and content creators to have a better understanding of how their content's being used. Okay, so we'll go ahead and jump to what I believe is our last slide in the main content areas. So as well as content owners, we also as administrators need information to help us understand our environment and be more productive. So there's a couple of tools that we have here. Many of you may have already subscribed to the Power BI content pack, which Microsoft provided. So this gives us a good kind of high-level holistic adoption set of metrics, a pretty nice dashboard there, which I'll show in a minute. There's a couple of key reports here. I think a lot of it's a bit high level, to be as effective as we want it to be. But there are some key reports in there related to teasing out maybe who are most likely champions in the organization, or maybe some details about say SharePoint site activity and taking some percentages of what our corpus looks like of active sites versus inactive. We also have our audit log search. So Office 365 does a great job of capturing data. It doesn't necessarily do the best job of presenting all of it, but one of the great things is that we can actually extract this data from the raw audit log, and you can use tools like Splunk or other big data tools to pipe that information to. And we've actually worked with some of our customers to pipe this data out and actually create very compelling and useful interfaces in Splunk to make use of this data. And then lastly, from a usage analytics point of view, like I was saying, we understand that what's there is a bit lacking in Office 365 and SharePoint Online. So we've worked with a number of our customers to implement other third-party tools for usage analytics like Google or Web Trends. Web Trends actually has a specific plugin for SharePoint and Office 365. So some cool things we can do here to help gain that insight from an administrative point of view. And on top of even pulling this as administrators, when we put this data into other systems like Splunk, we can then even make that available to content owners so they can gain a bit more insight than what they would get just from out of the box. So we'll just take a very brief look at the content pack here. For those of you that haven't seen it, we have kind of an overview here of some basic information about the environment and active usage. And then some of the key areas that we typically look at, let me slide over here, there's lots of information in here, is the SharePoint usage slide. So this gives a good indication of kind of how much fresh versus stale content you potentially have in your system. So just like a reasonable indicator. And then I think Matt was keying me earlier that one of the most important ones that he looks at with customers, especially with relation to adoption, is to look at some of the SharePoint user activity or Yammer user activity to tease out who are some of our real key users that might be able to help influence and educate some of the other folks in the organization how they can be more productive by using the tools. So I would urge you to take a look into this a little bit more. We don't have the time to dive into it too much today, but that's definitely something that we'd be happy to help with. Okay. So just a quick recap of what we went through today then. We know that inadequate governance can come with a fairly substantial cost, whether that be a productivity loss or compliance penalties. We've learned that automating the injection of our governance processes is something that can save us time and money, and also provide consistency in the way that we do that, so we can feel more comfortable that across our environment that we're really making sure that we're applying those policies and getting what we want out of the environment. We know that educating and empowering our users, especially on which tool to use and when, is essential. I can't emphasize enough the power that this has on getting the most out of your investment in Office 365. Most of the time at the beginning, this is not an easy transition, but once the light bulb comes on, when we've provided the right assets at the right time and enough times, that it's really powerful to see how that transforms the way that people do their work on a daily basis. And then lastly, this analysis of our environment, making sure that we can gain and provide insights to ourselves and to our content owners, allows us to take action and make sure that we're spending our time wisely, whether that's maintaining a healthy environment or creating content that's most useful to our team. So with that being said, just a call to action here. Again, as Manny said at the beginning, we work in many different areas, but some of them related to governance and adoption. We do Office 365 workload workshops. We do security and configuration health checks and remediation. We do governance workshops, governance and adoption workshops to help educate teams and kind of work through the details of what needs to be put into place to have an effective governance process in place. OneDrive for business planning workshops, adoption services, and many others. Also, if you're interested in taking a look at the application that we went through today, the Netwoven Office 365 governance application, we have a 1-month free trial. You can go to the URL here, just go to our website, sign up for that. Feel free to reach out and drop any questions. We're happy to help. And then for those that attended the webinar today, for any potential migrations that you have coming up, we're happy to offer a free content inventory report to help you understand the corpus of information that's there and kind of get you moving on the right track. And other than that, any other questions, please feel free to let us know. And we definitely have more we have more webinars coming up in our Office 365 governance series. And I believe the next one we have planned diving into the Security and Compliance Center and how we can be a little bit more kind of targeted and smart about data loss prevention, advanced threat protection, and some of the other features that are available in there. So Manny, I'll kind of go ahead and turn it back over to you at this point.
Yeah, I don't know if we have much time for questions, but I just wanted to let everyone know that we've been answering questions on the question area on your dashboard there. Thanks for the folks that have asked questions. But if there are more, I'm happy to answer them at info@netwoven.com. As I mentioned earlier, we can provide workshops that we can run for you: strategy planning, jumpstarts program, full implementation. Just to summarize a few, and so just reach out to info@netwoven.com. We can also provide a detailed demonstration of the governance and application that was shown in a deeper demo. If you'd like, in discussion, just again, reach out to info@netwoven.com. Matt, are there any kind of pressing questions that you saw on the screen there that we can answer very quickly on the call?
Yeah, a few good ones come in. Tim asked that we mentioned GDPR is being enforced this year. When does GDPR actually get enforced? So Tim, May 25th, I answered it in the chat. It was adopted back in 2016, but we had this 2-year grace period. So everybody mark May 25th on their calendars for GDPR enforcement. Aaron had asked, can we get a download link to the O365 Help Center that Drew had demoed? That would be part of a Netwoven engagement. We would provide that as a deliverable. And then the last one, I thought, Kathleen asked if we could modify the content pack to see permissions at an item or site level for Power BI. And right now, our content pack doesn't have these data points in them, but the SharePoint APIs expose them, so it could be part of a custom content pack. So I think that's all we have time for right now. If anybody else, like Manny said, if anybody else had any questions, shoot them over to info@netwoven.com. Else, I think we're good.
Okay, great. That is it for today's webinar. Thank you all for participating diligently and actively and answering the polls and listening carefully. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out at info@netwoven.com. Thank you and good afternoon. Bye.